This is Powering the Future, a podcast series brought to you by Smart Grid Forums. One planet, one power grid.
The more connected our power grids become, the more exposed they are. Joining us today is Styrmir Jonsson, CISO at Landsnet in Iceland, to unpack the most pressing cyber risks facing the grid today. So, hello Styrmir, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to be here.
Styrmir, before we go on to the conversation about OT cybersecurity in the grid, it would be great to have a bit more context and background on your career to date and how you ended up arriving at Landsnet.
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's a long career. I've been in IT since 1993, so it's over 30 years that I've been here. I started my IT career actually working for the U.S. Navy, directly for the U.S. Navy. They had a base here in Iceland, and I started working in IT just like any other IT environment at the time. Quite simple. Ethernet was just starting. Security in IT was not much of a concern because it was pretty much isolated. Internet was just a good idea at the time. Not very many had internet connections, and so it was a great time actually to start in IT as a programmer. But very soon, I evolved actually into working more and more with security, especially with the military, with how they handle security and threats, where actually security and threats is the primary mindset. So it's a very good training ground to actually get somebody to get your mindset, I would say, set correctly. And you should always think about security and threats before you think about pretty much everything else. Of course, I'm not biased. So I worked there until 2006, where I was actually the primary IT security admin at the time. And by that time, the military, or rather the Navy, was leaving Iceland. So I got into consulting. And of course, I started consulting on IT security. Unfortunately, at the time around 2006, a lot of people weren't much interested in IT security. They said they were, but primary focus was just making work and making it cheap. I stayed there for a year or two, and then I started working for a company, consulting company called Capacent, which was on the Nordic market, and we were in Iceland, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. And I started there as the CTO for the company. It was a very interesting time, which actually gave me opportunities just to work on solutions and obviously security as well, which was quite important because Capacent was a company that was not just consulting. It was also owned Gallup in Iceland, so it was a lot of very sensitive information. And we also had a company that did hiring, especially here in Iceland. So again, very sensitive with GDPR information. I was there for a number of years. Later on, I switched to being the CIO for the group, and I did that role for a couple of years until COVID. And COVID pretty much did away with Capacent because it was very sensitive to the loss of income that occurred in COVID. So I went from Capacent to work as a consultant, a manager inside KPMG. I had a 2-year stint there, which was quite interesting. I got to do a lot of security work, got to work with a lot of smart people there, and with a lot of customers here in Iceland. It was a great time. But then this opportunity of becoming the CISO for Landsnet arose when a friend called me and told me the CISO here was quitting. So, and making a long story short, I started working for Landsnet a little bit under 3 years ago. And when I came in here, I saw that this was a great place to work. It was a great opportunity to do well, and to do well for something that a lot of us really don't think about before we see what it actually is: a critical infrastructure, a necessary infrastructure. And a lot of people don't think about it, that if the TSO is not functioning, nothing else matters because you can produce all the power that you want, but there will be no power. So it's very important that the TSOs work, especially here in Iceland, where if something were to happen to us, the aluminum smelters would stop freezing up after 3 hours. So that's pretty much the window that we have to make sure that we deliver electricity to them. So it's been a great ride, and I look forward to doing hopefully many more years here.
So Styrmir, we've had some really great conversations recently, really interesting about, how utilities need to gear up to deal with emerging threats on the landscape, both in terms of technology, but organizational issues, skill set and collaboration. So I'd like to deep dive into some of that to give our viewers a taste of what's possible in the future. First, let's start with the energy transition itself. How would you define the new threats that have been introduced by utilities now operating a very digital grid on a real-time basis?
Well, the threats actually that are posed in today's world, where everything is becoming interconnected, where we're actually taking the substations and we're almost turning them into miniature server rooms. Obviously, it means that a lot of the old OT technology that used to just be a lot of copper wires is now actually a lot of digital data that's flowing inside the substations and, of course, in the control tenants themselves. And this means that interconnectivity is even more important now, of course, inside the TSOs. But it also means that we are now bringing IT equipment deeper into the OT sector. In the OT sector, it traditionally is just very simple stuff, usually a fiber optic cable or an Ethernet cable that could connect to a device, and that device would be an OT device. Now, what we're dealing with today is that a lot of these devices now are just OT devices that are connected in the same way as IT devices are, with service ports, with station communication and communication to the SCADA systems. But then we're actually moving on to the next level, which means that we are replacing almost all of these devices except the final control, the digital switch, for lack of a better word, that turns something on and off, with physical servers. Physical servers, much like we use in IT today, with dual redundancy, and everything is now actually being done inside the servers, and they're controlling our substations directly. So a lot of the threats now that we know in IT obviously are going to follow these IT equipment into the OT. And it's a dual-edged sword. The bad thing is there's probably more threats that come with this because they need more interconnectivity. But the upside is that it's a very well-known risk. There's a lot of people that are actually very familiar with the IT technology, which means that we could probably service them a little bit better. There used to be a handful of electrical engineers that knew how this equipment worked, and this can now be supported by a wider range of people, IT people that can actually come into this to help the electrical engineer set this up and run the equipment. But it also means that if we're not careful and we don't apply our due diligence to make sure that we protect these devices properly, it could be quite easy for hacker actually to get in there and not necessarily do anything right away, but possibly wait for an opportunity to do some damage.
Right. And as we add AI to the technology mix within utility operations, I imagine that threat is likely to increase quite substantially, as well as perhaps some of the solutions that would be AI powered as well. What are your thoughts on AI and its potential, both in terms of threat and opportunity?
Right. Yeah. AI obviously is great. I think we are all using AI, and a lot of us have been using it even without knowing it for years. We have a security solution that automatically learns, looks at our data, notifies us when it sees something out of the ordinary. That's AI. But then, of course, this means that people that have been average hackers up till now could actually be good hackers. You can actually have the AI system analyze a code for a control system and now analyze it for weaknesses, which means that the hackers can now do in seconds or minutes something you would actually need an expert to analyze for a week. And this obviously is a threat. But AI is not just a threat, it also helps us in defending. This means that we can do this as well. We can use AI actually to look for vulnerabilities inside our system. We can use AI to help us actually do the work of several people and being a defender. The problem with AI, of course, is that it's still rather new. And for lack of a better word, the large language models are still not very well understood. And from what I understand, not even by the people that made them. So they can be unpredictable. So we have to be careful with AI. We have to be careful how we bring this in. And we have to make sure that our IT people don't get tempted to start hooking up some of our systems actually to AI for assistance, because it's kind of a black box for security people. So obviously, when AI has learned something, it's in there forever. And so that's some of the threats that AI is bringing to us, and obviously some of the opportunities.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it, is that anything the bad guys can leverage, the good guys can leverage too, to offset that. So yeah, that's a very positive way. Added to this new technological dimension is, the supply chain. The utility supply chain is expanding. The sort of number of partners as well that flexibility is going to introduce is also expanding. What sort of new threats do utilities need to take care of in that context?
I think the utilities in general, at least here in Europe, have probably not been taking the supply chain or the threats in the supply chain very seriously up until now. I think everybody is trying now to catch up. And first of all, the vendor assessment. Uh, of course, the threat assessment of what we are actually buying and bringing it to the systems. And then, of course, today's landscape where our former friends maybe our future enemies, then we have to figure out who could actually be trying to do us harm. And this means that we actually have, and the TSOs all have this, we have something that are called red countries, countries that could pose a threat to us. We need to be more due diligent with them. These are countries that are actually, let's take China, for example. It's a country that we all do a lot of business with. You open up your laptop, like the one I'm on right now. It's a Lenovo laptop. It's made in China. It's owned by the Chinese. So we have to make sure that the system itself is safe, that it hasn't been tampered with in some way, and the same goes, of course, for our critical infrastructure devices. That whatever we bring in, whether it be a router, whether it be a control, a server, and even the cables that we're buying, the cables that are transporting energy for us, are they safe? And people will ask, well, why shouldn't they be safe? It's just a copper wire. But it turns out that most of the cables made today, they also have fiber optic cables in, because it doesn't cost all that much more to have it. So the producer will add a fiber optic cable. And this certainly produces new threats that have to be dealt with. And of course, in the assessment of the vendor, you need to, of course, make sure that this is a safe vendor, but also need to make sure that the governing bodies that are governing you, that they are aware of that you may actually be buying fiber optic cables by accident or by design when you're buying copper cables, and that how they look at that. Is this a threat to the governing body or not?
I suppose that needs a very high level of specification capability within the utility organization, and cybersecurity people working with their technical teams, the domain technical teams, to be able to ascertain that. What's the progress in bringing those teams together within your utility? How are your teams working together?
It's a great question, because I would say up till a few years ago, these teams would really not work together much. The electrical engineers would come to IT when they needed something. They would not involve IT at all, obviously, because traditionally they didn't have to. These were just copper cables with devices that, yes, they use fiber optic cables for the SCADA system to control them, but otherwise you couldn't really do much. And it was rather secure, it was air gapped. Now, today, in today's landscape, air gapping is really impossible. Across Europe, the SCADA systems need to share a certain amount of data between each other. You need to know that you're in sync. You need to know how much you're producing. You need to tell others how much you're going to be producing next week, and so on. So there's different levels of data sharing, and there's different levels of connectivity. For us here in Iceland, this means, for instance, that the teams that are now assembling the new substations, which, as we mentioned before, are digital substations with servers, they actually now need to consult with the IT people because they often have the skills that they need to apply this. Now, now we come to the human factors in cybersecurity. The electrical engineers don't necessarily have to talk to IT. They could just have their supplier do everything for them. They have contractors which will come in and set this up for them. And then they just hook everything up and everybody is happy. But that can definitely be a problem because these are not either security experts, they're certainly not cybersecurity experts, and they may accidentally open up pathways into the system. And we've seen this actually happen here at Landsnet, where a system is actually hooked up to IT that shouldn't be. And this can definitely happen by accident. And sometimes it happens by design because people really don't respect the level of security that you need to apply to the systems. And this means that one of the jobs of the CISO is to make sure that you have a very good relationship with the whole team. You need to visit them. You need to be their advisor. Obviously, you need to be their friend as well. And you also need to try to make sure that they trust you, that they trust that what you are trying to do for them is not a hindrance to what they need to do, but it's actually an enablement. And that's where you need to make sure that cybersecurity today needs to be an enabler. Because I think everybody knows that they don't want to be hacked. And everybody knows that cybersecurity into today's environment is a good idea. But building a team inside, for instance, Landsnet has taken a few years. But we actually now have an OT dedicated cybersecurity team, which I'm involved with, which has a couple of great engineers, electrical engineers, that are very interested in cybersecurity and now are proactively applying cybersecurity to how we are planning our new digital infrastructure and our new, of course, digital substations.
Well, I would say, Styrmir, that you're a very good example of a very bold and courageous CISO within the utility sector in Europe. And it would be great to see many more CISOs, stand up and be heard in the way that you are. What do you think? Human factors is absolutely essential, and it's really going to take cybersecurity to the next level within the utility sector. What are some of the criteria? What are the recommendations you would give other CISOs in other utilities as to how they need to position themselves, interact with their teams and with senior leadership to really drive the visibility and the voice of cybersecurity within the power sector?
The problem with the TSOs, is that they're all a little bit different. Obviously, they all have the same mission and they all have the same challenges. However, we in the Nordics work a lot together. The CISOs in the Nordics, we meet each other physically twice a year. We speak to each other monthly, and we share the challenges and how we are approaching them. So I have a little bit of insight into how the Nordics are doing this. We also cooperate on the level NTSOE. So we have the greater European grid, and we see the challenges that are there. And I would say that it's a little bit easier for the Icelandic TSO to get to this level for the simple fact that we are smaller. The TSOs, obviously in the Nordics and of course in Europe, Germany, so it's a lot larger and often there's more of them. There's not necessarily just one like there's in Iceland. But I would always approach this that the CISO, first of all, needs to make sure that they have this personal connection to the people that actually are doing the job. They need to make sure that when they find fault, not to come shouting, but to come out as an advisor, and to make sure that security is a destination. It's not a race. Obviously, sometimes you can find stuff that needs to be handled right away. But even if it's serious, there's often other controls that can help. So make sure that you sit down with people. You make sure that you have a common understanding of the challenges and why there are challenges, because often people don't realize. And you need to empower them and get them involved on finding the solution. Once you get people interested, empowered, and involved, then you start to get to see results.
Absolutely. That's great advice. And with that in mind, we'd really like to encourage more CISOs from across European utilities to join us at SGT26 in Paris next year and to collaborate, share experiences, share insights such as what you've been sharing with us today. What's your message, Styrmir, for any CISO who's sat in their utility at the moment thinking, I'd rather not speak publicly or be seen publicly. I'd rather work in my own environment. That feels a lot safer. What's your view on that, and what's your message?
Well, quite frankly, and thank you. I got to join you this year in The Hague. I think that we are a secretive bunch. We'd like to share sometimes, and we're afraid of sharing. CISOs don't like to speak about incidents at all. And even if it could be an incident that wouldn't necessarily be secret, we are also often too busy to go to conferences like this one because we think that maybe we should be sending our people to it, but not attending ourselves. And that is a mistake because first of all, you have a great cybersecurity track. And I must admit, before I joined your conference the first time, I thought I was actually going to sit down and look at what the electrical engineers were doing, maybe a little bit cyber here and there. But I actually spent pretty much every single day and every single hour going over what my colleagues and our colleagues were actually doing. And a lot of them shared a lot of interesting stories. And the good thing about it is, even if you know and have done all this before that they have done, it's actually knowing that you're not alone. You have the same challenges. And actually, it gives you a little bit of verification that what you are trying to do and trying to convince other people to do is actually what everybody else is doing as well. And you actually learn a little bit something new. For instance, like I did at the conference, which I haven't really thought about here in Iceland, is what 30,000 cars in Holland all charging at the same time at night. What can happen if that provider is hacked and it's just shut off all at the same time? An electrical engineer will tell you that's a very bad idea.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great example. And that's the beauty of SGT 26 is that it's a pan-European event. So you get case studies and examples and insights from security people from all over Europe, currently facing different scenarios, but who knows, the Netherlands scenario could become our scenario in future. All right, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Styrmir. Great to have you on the podcast today and looking forward to seeing you again at SGT 26 in Paris. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Same here.
That's it for today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the Smart Grid Forum's YouTube channel and follow us on LinkedIn for more expert conversations.
This is Powering the Future, a podcast series brought to you by Smart Grid Forums. One planet, one power grid.